Thank you so much. We are super excited to be here again and even more excited to be joined by our colleague Marcy, who I will allow introduce herself. But for those of you who came and joined us for our first round, welcome back. For those of you who are new, welcome. We are very enthusiastic supporters of the product model and are excited to share some thoughts with you. But before we get started, obviously want to introduce myself and my colleagues. So I am Lynn Overman. I am the executive director at the Beck Center at Georgetown, and a longtime fan of Ms. Ann Lewis.
Right back at you, Lynn. Hi, everyone. My name is Ann Lewis. I was formerly the director of TTS at GSA in the Biden-Harris administration. Today, I'm collaborating with Niskanen Center and can't wait to tell you more about the product model and how to roll it out and get really hands-on with your questions and ideas. And I will pass it to Marcy.
Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be joining this group and very excited to talk with all of you about shifting from project management to product management. I am the Chief Digital Experience Officer and Deputy Secretary for the state of Maryland, Department of IT. I lead the Maryland Digital Service, which is a new organization within the state. And before coming here, I've spent 20 plus years either in government directly working at USDS out of the White House and leading the team at the VA, and also spent a lot of time consulting with federal government clients. So very excited to join this group and share some stories.
All right. So we did a session 2 weeks ago that was a deep dive into the product model, what it is, how it differs from the project model or the default way of thinking about managing large technology projects or implementation projects in general. If you attended this, welcome back. If you didn't, Agata has shared the slides from the previous session, and also folks can put notes in the chat here on where to find them. But if you're new and this is your first session, instead of repeating ourselves, what we're going to do is walk you through what we hope is a fun exercise. Specifically, using the product model to plan a family vacation. Lynn?
Awesome. I will confess that Anne came up with this idea by herself. And then I told her I have literally gone through this experience. So I have 4 children who are, at the time that we had this conversation around the dinner table, were teenagers, and did have this conversation, where should we go on family vacation? I was actively involved in the discussion from the start to steer it. So I think I took the product model approach from the outset. But in this scenario, what the parent did, which I would not recommend, is they stepped away and said, go off and come up with your list of requirements and come back to us. Anyone who has ever dealt with children who have very strong opinions about what they want to do and where they want to go will not be surprised by the outcome in the scenario, which is they came back with 35 different cities and 120 different activities. They weren't sure if they would ever have a chance to engage again about where we would go for family vacation. And after this exercise, probably would not have. And so we're trying to pile everything that they possibly could into this one document in the hopes that somehow or another, something would come out on the other side of it that would look a lot like a fun family vacation to a cool place where they didn't have to spend too much time with their parents. Anne?
Sorry, just struggling to get myself off mute there. And I just wanted to say I was probably this kind of overachieving yet neurotic information hoarding teenager, probably. So you're 4, let's just say that there are 4 teenagers here. They're all competing with each other. They have a million ideas of what to do with this precious family vacation. They've come up with a list of 35 cities to visit, 120 activities. You can already tell that this process is going off the rails. So what are some problems here that may be reminiscent of problems that you've experienced in your work here? This requirements document of every possible thing that your teenagers might want to do doesn't actually fit into the reality of and the constraints of what you can actually spend time and money on. So your family has only 1 week of vacation time together. That's not enough time to visit 35 cities, even if you're on some sort of reality show. It's just impossible. Also, 120 activities are not going to fit into a week. And even if they could, you don't have the budget to spend $1 million on a family vacation. That's kind of ridiculous. So how can you reconcile this ridiculous vacation requirements document that your teenagers came up with with the reality of the constraints of your vacation. Lynn?
So if you used the product or project model, you might fully defer all decision-making to the teenagers and let them deal with the impossibility of their plan. So go forth, book us flights. Here is your budget. You may decide that you can't go on vacation at all until Congress gives you more vacation budget, and good luck with that. You may attempt to make everyone happy by taking 5% of each idea and attempting to cobble that together in something that looks like a plan. You might choose a random plan and then tell everyone if they don't like it, they can try again next year, aka modernize later. Or you may get discouraged until someone gives you official approval, certification, training for reconciling the family vacation plan. Or you may end up with really annoyed teenagers, which is what in fact happened in my scenario.
So if this were a project in a work context, we might be stuck trying to figure out what to do. But the purpose of this exercise is to remind all of us that you actually already know how to solve these problems. You know how to, in this particular situation, if you're just trying to figure out how to help your family have a rewarding, fun vacation week together, you know that you have to step in here, take back that ridiculous requirements document, be a benevolent dictator, and just choose one city to visit. That's the only thing that is logistically possible here. And then maybe you loop your teenagers into the decision, or maybe you just decide for them. But either way, you make the call as an empowered decision maker. And now that you have the constraints, the project-specific constraints of one city to visit, and you know what your budget is, you know that you only have a week, you can ruthlessly prioritize their proposed 150 or 130 list of activities down to something that will fit into the week. Again, you can do that with stakeholder feedback, specifically asking your teenagers, do you like this activity better than the other? But at the end of the day, if a vacation's going to get planned, you know that you have to do that work of making those decisions while bringing everyone along. And then instead of waiting until every possible detail is perfectly figured out and in the family vacation spreadsheet, you work iteratively. The minute you know where you're going and what week you're going, you book your plane tickets. The minute you know roughly what area you want to explore, you book your hotel room. And then iteratively, you work through your vacation planning process until everything is booked. Sometimes you leave some things towards the end of the planning process. Sometimes there are things in the beginning, but every step of the way, you make a decision, do an iteration, let everyone know, hey, we've booked tickets to this location. We're going on to the next iteration. And in this way, we're getting stakeholder feedback and working iteratively.
So we appreciate you bearing with us through what we thought was an entertaining model. I will also say you have succeeded in your vacation product model approach if you manage to get any head-on pictures of your teenagers, but which I have not recently. But to bring this back to the reality of what we're all grappling with here, hopefully this is an exercise that will sound familiar for those of you who have attempted to use the product model or have successfully used the product model already in your jobs. So what you did was you stepped in, you either stepped in before requirements were collected, or you stepped in when you saw that the requirements document that was getting generated for your project was absolutely not going to result in a workable product that would serve your end users. And you started by using that requirements document or using that process to understand your user needs. You defined done and good enough, and then you move forward on a small piece of the puzzle, which was picking the city and booking your flights. You acted as an empowered decision maker. So yes, you take input, your users are critical, but you are the person who's running the project and the product and know how to respond to those needs using the tools that you have in your toolkit. You made regular decisions along the way, working within the constraints that you had. You worked iteratively and you delivered at the end, not necessarily what they asked for, but what they in fact needed, and it worked.
That's right. So this might seem like a familiar or even silly metaphor to be walked through here, because you know that when situations like this occur in your life, probably most of us know how to deal with them. Maybe some of us come from families where there was malicious compliance and the parents were like, well, you're going to fail at that, so I'm just going to let you have that life lesson there, and they just sort of watch it happen. But most of the time, the parents step in and are benevolent dictators and make good decisions and drive a process that allows the entire family to have a rewarding experience. And there are lots of other situations in your life when you might have encountered a situation like this where you step in and you apply constraints, you get feedback, but make decisions, you work iteratively until you get the thing done. So when situations like this occur in your life, you know how to deal with them.
But obviously, when situations like this occur in your work, it is not always as easy as corralling your children and making decisions, because frankly, your children often don't have the same choice as your colleagues do or your bosses. So when these situations occur in work, how do you start and what do you need?
All right, so we're just gonna have a reminder slide here of some of the key principles we covered a couple weeks ago. When you're trying to embody, roll out, change processes, change culture and behavior to adopt the product model in your work, uh, we need to focus on not just adhering to the letter of the law in a giant requirements document, but focus on which problems that we want to solve and why, and not how to solve them. So one way that the family vacation planning example could have gone sideways is if when you saw that giant requirements document with your teenagers, you said, well, let's talk about a better way of formatting a requirements document. You could have spent like a couple of days or weeks on that. Would that have yielded a constrained iterative working environment with decisions made? Maybe, maybe not. But when you focus on what are the problems we need to solve and why, plan the vacation, plan it soon so that the prices for tickets don't go up, then that can direct your energy and effort and the people around you and the people who report to you in a more efficient way. Um, Another key principle of the product model is working in small, nimble, empowered internal teams, and starting out with something called discovery sprints, which allows you to better define what problems to solve and why from the perspective of the people you're trying to solve those problems for. It's very easy to start trying to tackle a giant system modernization project by going through all the documentation of everything that came before and looking at all the data and all the features and trying to understand why would anybody use this. Or you could identify who uses this monstrosity of a system that we've inherited. Are there different categories of users with different needs? Let's talk to them. Let's understand their needs. What from their perspective is working or broken? Because sometimes when you step into a new system and it looks broken to you, it might not be broken from the perspective of the people who've learned to use it. And in fact, something else might be taking up a lot of their time. So it's really important to, before just diving in and starting to solve problems, understanding and verifying your hypothesis about what problems you need to solve and why by talking to your users. And then when it comes to, if you figured out, here are some problems to solve through some sort of discovery process, most likely you will discover more problems to solve than you have time to solve. So you have to prioritize. And a couple of things that will help you when you're prioritizing and driving work forward are working iteratively. So if you're starting down a path and you think it's the right path, you'll know in a couple of weeks whether it's the right or wrong path if you break the work into chunks and get feedback after every step. And then you'll probably encounter when working with tech folks of all stripes that there's a solution to a problem that fits the user's needs. And sometimes there's a solution to a problem that would be really fun to build because engineers love to build things. Just because it's fun to build and just because it's a new framework doesn't necessarily mean that's going to deliver the right value at the right time to your user base. And so it's helpful to constrain the complexity of all the decisions you're making with any forcing function whatsoever. And at the end of the day, it can't also just be because you said so. We're going to constrain the complexity here and start with a small budget, get something that works, and then build off of it. And then this last point here gets into driving towards outcomes versus outputs. It's pretty easy to get a whole team or a set of vendor teams together and have them be like, well, we did work. Here's all the work that we did. It's a list of things that you told us to do. And we did some of them. We filled up all of our hours. You're welcome. But that doesn't necessarily add up to something that is done based on how you have defined it. So driving large projects in particular towards outcomes instead of outputs is a super helpful practice. All right, so that's a reminder of what the product model is, a reminder that on an intuitive level, you all know how to apply this because you do it in your daily lives, but we need to figure out how to translate that common sense about how to get stuff done while de-risking, working iteratively, and controlling for complexity into our work environments. So in the last session, we after the last session, we sent out a survey asking you about your experiences using the product and the project model and found that many of you are using the product model already, which is very exciting. There's a couple of quotes here from folks who had found the product model useful both in building something or delivering something and also in calling it quits on something that wasn't going to work out before spending too much money on it. Lynn?
Great. So it was wonderful to see, and thank you to everyone who filled out the survey who may be with us again today. It was so great to see a number of examples of people having used this model successfully. And I do want to double down on the idea of one of the high value propositions of this model is that you try something and figure out it doesn't work and then pull the plug on further spending, either because the vendor didn't deliver or it was the wrong project or both. And then you can reinvest that money in a place where it actually works as opposed to getting multiple years into a contract, having failed technology and being stuck with your vendor. Not surprisingly, though, part of the survey, what we learned was that there are still a lot of open questions about how, practically speaking, to implement the product model, depending on where you are. We wanted to highlight some of what we heard from that survey. And then I think just share here, we did add extra time for questions. So a lot of the session is really going to be focused on answering your questions. There are going to be questions that you all raised today that we won't be able to answer right off the bat, but we do want to let you know we are noting those and looking towards perhaps building some more resources beyond these webinars. But some of the key areas that were highlighted as places where people said that they could use additional help was documentation. So playbooks and check like how you can actually implement this in a practical way, particularly within government, so folks can follow a playbook and learn from what people have done. Examples of other states and governments who have used the product model and what they were able to generate as a result. I think a lot of us know, having worked in government, that nothing can get a new leader on board or a leader on board by saying, well, our rival state did this, or actually you're not, this isn't that risky. It has been done before. Let me show you how, and let me show you what they were able to achieve. More trainings we heard would be very useful. And then obviously like probably the hardest or one of the hardest pieces of this puzzle is how do you get from a funding model that is a giant chunk of cash all at once for the old project model to the more sustainable, consistent funding to support teams and product development over time.
All right. Oh, I forgot to ask you how this would work. Is this something that you can kick off here, a live poll? Ooh, there it is. Magic. All right. So we know that you all face different kinds of barriers in your work. Just generally curious if there are any categories or patterns across your use cases and agencies. All right, the poll results are rolling in here. It's really interesting. We're about, I guess, about a third of people have clicked the poll here. So it looks like some emerging themes are not being sure about how to empower people to do product management work, which makes sense. It's one thing if you say, do the product model now, everyone's like, what does that mean? So that's a place to spend some time. Procurement processes here also are some issues, but it looks like across the board, all of the issues we've mentioned here are barriers. So that's helpful to know about as we focus our Q&A sessions at the end of this session, and then also think about future additional programming. So thank you for participating in this poll. It looks like we've gotten to about 50% here.
And do you want me to close the poll? Just let me know.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a screenshot here and then let's close the poll. Thanks. All right, cool. Thanks everyone for participating in that. All right, and now I'm going to introduce Marcy Jacobs.
Hi, everybody. That was really interesting to see some of the challenges or questions that you all have when you're thinking about this. And it feels like there's a lot of energy and excitement around this, but kind of how do I get from this is a really cool idea and I know that what we're doing isn't working to I want to start actually doing this and kind of lining things up. So I am kind of living this transition or trying to live this transition in Maryland right now. We are currently very much using project models, and my team is responsible for oversight of our major IT development projects. And that means that we have an audit function that looks at how these projects are set up. And None of them have any concept of product management or human-centered design or even in-house engineering leadership. And what we are finding through, we're basically engaging for discovery sprints when a project is in need of some additional support. So the project is off track for whatever reason. It could be staffing, it could be procurement is hung up, it could be a lot of things. And what we are finding consistently is the definition of success is currently, is it on time and on budget? And if it's not on time and on budget, then it is at risk. The on time and on budget, like what is this going to cost and how long is it going to take, is a very artificial construct. Based on what? We don't know in the beginning how long something is going to take, how complicated it's going to be. But then we are following a process right now that my team is changing, but has been enforcing for a while, of documenting all of your requirements and then issuing a procurement. And, documenting requirements could take a year, and issuing procurement could take another year and a half. And then in 2 to 3 years, you get a vendor on board to build a list of shall statements that in many cases are kind of a reverse engineering of the old thing that we had that we're trying to modernize. And I think that there is a real, even if we are successful in doing that, we are building what we needed 20 years ago in shinier technology. We are not building what we need right now or what we need for the next 20 years. So we are trying to drive this shift to thinking about how do we define outcomes? What will be better about your program if you modernize this technology? What are the unlocks? What does your current system not do? How do we think about users in this equation and bring them really into understanding what people are doing as opposed to understanding what a system that was created a long time ago currently offers. I'm seeing lots of questions coming through. I have seen this same failure mode for my entire career. When I was at the VA, I saw this a lot. One project that my team was pulled in to support was for the caregiver program. Caregivers are typically family members who are taking care of an injured or ill veteran, and they receive some type of a stipend. And there was a system that was built. There was a very not robust system to handle this stipend for like 200 caregivers. And then it kept being added to and added to and added to and added to. And then they needed to replace it with something that was more robust. And my team was pulled in after they had spent a non-trivial amount of money with 3 different vendors. We got a list of requirements from the team that manages this, a group of social workers, kind of threw over a list of requirements. This is what our system does right now. And then vendor A tried to build it. And at the end of 2 years and a lot of money, nobody was happy with what was built. So then they went to vendor B, who took the same approach. And at the end of another few years and another bucket of money, they came back and said, we can't keep, we're doing something wrong. We are not getting the outcome that we need. Can you help us think about this differently? And our approach to this was really taking a product mindset, embedding with the team, talking with the end users, really ruthlessly prioritizing what is the critical functionality, not just a list of 500 shall statements, but what are the major features that need to be part of this deployment. And with a much smaller budget and much smaller time frame, we were able to ship a product. It was not the inclusive everything, all the bells and whistles product, which was fine. And it continued to be added to over time. And what I see as this failure mode is this effort to be comprehensive. We need to document everything. And like going back to the travel example, which I thought was great, if you've now narrowed down your city and you are now planning your trip, it's as crazy as saying we're going to plan every rest stop, every meal, what we're going to eat, every single detail for the entire trip that's not even happening for 3 months. You don't know that. You need to know enough upfront to be directionally correct And then that product model and that prioritization and that input from users continues to happen over time. So this effort to kind of gather all the requirements and baseline and lock down your requirements sets teams up to fail. You are never going to know everything in the beginning. And if you try to build everything that you thought was right, 3 years later, when it finally gets awarded, you are building things that you likely don't need. So I feel like that's enough of the setup. I'd love for us to kind of open up the floor and maybe we can take some questions from the group and hear what people want to talk about.
That sounds great. And just so folks are aware, we're going to spend the remainder of this call just on your questions and workshopping some solutions to challenges that you're facing. And I'm realizing I can't see whose hands are raised. So Agatha, can you help us call on?
Absolutely. And there are also some questions already, so I can identify some. Okay, give me a I mean, I am start reading, okay? I'm not exactly in the same order, but question from Georgia. Question, are these any use cases of using the product model in the climate tech realm? Can you, okay.
Yeah, so the Beck Center actually runs a project that's focused on local governments. It's called the Opportunity Project for Cities. And we did a number of, and these are, to be clear, like small products, but that's actually perhaps a quite useful way to work. And it's intended to work off of open data. But they basically, the structure of that is they take, they go out and they find community partners and government partners. They identify a project that both the community wants and the government is committed to implementing, and they develop tools in response. I don't actually, interestingly, I'm not sure that they themselves recognize that they're using the product model, but the way that that project is structured is specifically to get to an output at the end that is a product that the community asked for, was consulted on and uses. So for example, they've developed community-based tree mapping projects in Akron and Long Beach. They developed an app in Miami that helps alert public transit users about heat risks. And they're working on a project that's looking at helping people better access. So I think honestly, the product model is topically agnostic and would encourage you to think about it. I know it can be tough when you are talking about topics that are very complex and have lots of different inputs. But I do think perhaps the way to start, and I'd be curious for Anne and Marcy's comments on this as well, is there an identifiable set of users that you can talk to and start from that might help you break out some of the work that you need to do in the climate tech space and can meet the needs of those users as a starting point?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think all of this starts in a generic way with understand who your users are, talk to them, figure out what problems they have, and then decide which of their problems you're going to try and solve within the constraints that you have.
It is a real shift to thinking about technology as the technology solution. So it's not starting with what platform should this be, or what technology should we use, or is this buy or build? It's starting with who is trying to do a thing and where are they having problems? Where is the technology making this hard? Or even, and in many cases, this kind of user research and service design helps uncover, is this a policy issue? Is this a talent issue? Like there could be lots of factors that are making friction in a user journey. Technology could be a significant piece of that, but technology is typically a reflection of how your program is set up. So starting with people and understanding what is happening front stage, what's happening with the customers who are engaging, the residents who are engaging, and what's happening backstage. When somebody hits submit and it goes to a staff member to process an application or a benefits form, are they seeing lots of issues and problems? What else do they need to be able to be more efficient?
Great. I'm going with a question from Irvin. How to balance conflict needs from different stakeholders?
There are so many strategies for that. I mean, and I'll just share some that have worked for me, but I'm sure that all of the speakers here have different perspectives. Sometimes stakeholders aren't aware that they're in conflict with each other, and just bringing them together and saying, here's your collective plan. Are we all aligned with this can help. Sometimes reminding stakeholders that we have constraints, whether it's budget or time or something else, that can be helpful. In a previous role, oversaw this more than 100 million a year project, where product level decisions were being made not by product managers, but by multiple federal agency committees. So like at least six agencies, reps from these different agencies getting together in these different formations that were coming up with ideas for new regulations and new policies. And they had no idea that every single time they did that, an implementation request would flow to this huge system and cause it to cost more in terms of a one-time build, but then also have more maintenance over time. And then these committees like would fight with each other for months. So just kind of like laying bare, here's the context that you exist within. Here are the constraints. Here are the costs. Here are the receipts of your ideas, how much they cost and why. And then showing that dynamic to them can help people become motivated to adjust and then come up with a better strategy around, in that case, it was called governance, to help stakeholders become aligned.
I would also bring data to those conversations. There can be a lot of loud voices in a room and stakeholders who are convinced that their shiny idea is the right path to go, and balancing that with testing with users, with interviews, with the impact of different approaches. You know, we can do this thing that's going to impact 5 million people, or we can do your thing that's going to cost the same and take the same amount of time and impact 150 people. They might be really important 150 people, and that still might be the right decision. But I think it's bringing that understanding of truly how are users going to benefit or not benefit from this? How many people does this impact? What does this unstick? So that it's not a opinion match, but it is truly based on data.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think data plus storytelling can be incredibly compelling, because oftentimes I think both Anne and Marcy made this point, is folks genuinely believe they know their programs really well. They think they know what their users need, and you can actually even just do some lightweight.
Lynn, I think we're missing you.
I think she's frozen.
Okay, so maybe I will go with a two-part question by Julia. Say, how do you integrate this approach for Gov folks who are managing a portfolio that they have managed complex build or buy decisions like public transit agency? This is part one of the question. Additionally, do you have any advice in using these techniques in the context of modernizing complex and interconnected legacy environments, or how to secure appropriate funding to invest in tech appropriately in the long term? So it's a complex question.
Yeah, that was all possible questions, which I respect and will take an attempt at, and then hopefully Marcy and Lynn can help out here too. So if you have a portfolio of many different projects and programs, individually those projects and programs in your portfolio can be managed with a product mindset or a product strategy. So it's not like taking this idea and applying it in a new way at the portfolio level. You'll still have a lot of choices and decisions to make at the portfolio level, especially if you have, budget constraints that force trade-offs, or new political appointees come in and have different ideas about what's a priority versus something else. So the portfolio level considerations, I think, are going to be the same, but what you'll get one or two layers below that within your portfolio is more visibility into how much things cost, what progress is being made, what problems we're solving, and why, from the perspective of which user groups. And that the sort of metadata that's generated when a product model is applied to a program can make your job as a leader of a portfolio easier, because you get more access to information that's helpful for making strategic and political decisions. And then I think the second part of the question was, but what if we have a really complicated legacy system? Yeah, most folks in this call probably are maintaining a really complicated legacy system. the technology that is being used to build the system in the age of the system are less relevant than do you have empowered decision makers who are deciding how to use the limited resources that you have to prioritize the work that's done in the context that you exist within. So you might have a new build, or you might have an old legacy system. The difference between those situations when you're using like a product model lens is the cost of particular types of implementation work, not your ability to prioritize. You can still prioritize, but it might be true if you have a mainframe duct taped to a bunch of on-prem servers that are connected through complicated data bridges no one else remembers how to deal with, to another system. The cost of changing something that involves data flowing through that whole legacy system might be higher than the cost of making the equivalent data change in a newer system. But this is just information that you can use to prioritize. So I wouldn't shy away from, like, if you have a vendor or a tech lead that's telling you, we've got this crazy like legacy system, we can't possibly do newfangled things like product management. That's wrong. You're in charge of this project. You can manage it however you want. And every single time you take a big, complex, hairy problem that everyone's afraid of and break it into smaller chunks and work in an iterative way, you get more progress and you get more information about what things cost and what the constraints and the barriers are. And I've forgotten the third part of the question.
I think it was around funding, but
Okay.
I would underscore what Anne said. I think that breaking a big complex legacy modernization into smaller pieces is honestly what makes the case for the funding. We're going to do a thing with a small amount of money and we're going to ship a thing that actually helps. And then we're going to do the next piece of this giant behemoth modernization effort. What I find is legacy modernizations are typically like the enormous price tag. They take at least 10 years. They have variable success. Being able to break that down and actually show progress is, I think, what starts to change the conversation of, we're not going to treat this as a 10-year one solution, you're going to have a thing at the end, but it's going to be hundreds of releases over the time frame to start building on success. And honestly, I think in many cases, this kind of speaks to the earlier piece about, are we modernizing what we had, or are we transforming and really building what we need today? So how do we not build a thing just because somebody built it 20 years ago and now we need to modernize it? Like, we have, if we're following this process, we actually have the context to understand, is this valuable? Is this still used? Is there something that is missing that would actually accelerate work and efficiency for staff, that would make the experience better for constituents?
Thank you, Marcy, very much. I have a question for Julie, a very tactical question. When managing a program that is so much going on, what automated tools have you used to manage backlogs, assignments, and sprints?
Again, I'm just curious what the other panelists or what their perspective is on this. I would hesitate against finding the best tool versus rolling out a process that works for you and then fitting it into whatever tool you hate the least. It's less about what tool is helping you do this and more about, are you prioritizing and are you making decisions iteratively within constraints? So I've seen people successfully work this model using spreadsheets. I've seen them use, whatever productivity tool is most popular for agile software development, and that works fine too. I've seen people shoehorn this into someone else's custom productivity tool. It's less about the tool than it is about the process. So I would say, come up with a process that you think could work, test it on your immediate team, get feedback, codify it as a process, and then decide what tool to use to track the process.
I would absolutely agree. We are somewhat tool constrained where I am right now, and we are following a process and using the tools that are available and augmenting that in a way to support what we need to know and what we need to do. So I wouldn't say like it must be X product or Y product.
Yeah, I would also say if there is a favorite tool though that gives you an in, like if you know your entire team that you're trying to persuade to do something loves Asana, go forth. like, I think getting back to Anne's point, the most important thing is strategically what's going to help you move the ball forward. I think what to avoid though, and I think this came up in some of the earlier comments as well, is don't get stuck on the tools. Get stuck on like figure out the process that you need and how you're going to get that necessary buy-in, and then use the tools to support that.
Yeah, and
Maybe.
just to go back to that planning a family vacation example, if you know that your teenagers are going crazy with the planning for the vacation, that you need to step in and diffuse the conflict, do you wait until you have the perfect tool for doing so, or do you just step in and diffuse the conflict?
You have to figure out a way to do it on TikTok. It's the only thing they pay attention to. There's a question in the chat from Sarah around the VA example and talking about problem scoping and defining success metrics and how to scope a problem and figure out what to measure. I would not say that there is one answer to this. I think that it is really around you are working on a project, a system for some reason. Like, we don't want to just modernize tech to have shinier tech. There's something that we are solving for. And I think it is truly understanding what will be better or different. We're going to have higher throughput of our benefits applications. We're going to be able to give out more grants. We're going to reduce the days that it takes from when you submit an application until you get a decision. We're going to have a more transparent process so people don't call the call center every single day asking what their status is. Like, what are the things that you are solving for? And those are the things you measure. So it is really broken right now. It takes 200 days to get XYZ. That is something that we want to shrink. I would not hazard to say we're going to get that down to 5 days, but we know that we want to see that moving in a certain direction. We know that we're getting high call volume because our process is not clear. We know we're getting bad data submitted because we're asking questions in a way that doesn't make sense to people. All of those types of things that are kind of the drivers for why you're engaged in this, and what does good look like at the end are the things that I would measure. I wouldn't have like a generic set of 10 KPIs that we say these are the things we always measure, because they're going to look different depending on what you're solving.
Yeah, I just like to foot stomp that. And it reminded me of a story of a federal agency that will not be named that had a surge of calls to their call center, and using a project mindset and also a sense of different leaders being isolated from each other and not having common goals, the metric that was adopted was, oh, we need to be able to handle higher call center volume. And so this team went off and spent hundreds of millions of dollars on a custom call center that I would argue they didn't need, because you shouldn't have to build your own one of those, but whatever. And then it turned out that the reason that the call volume was so high was that someone had rolled out a change to the website where you can check the status of your benefits application for that particular thing. And the wording was really confusing. So every single person who logged in after the change was rolled out was confused by the wording and were like, wait, do I have to do something? And called the call center. So metrics are super helpful and important, but you need to take a holistic view of what you're trying to do in the context of who your users are. And in this case, people who needed federal benefits. What do they want, or what's broken from their perspective? And the answer to that question had the call center person looked across the whole like user journey was, oh, I have no idea what this phrase means when I log into my account, and it scares me. I'm going to call someone and ask for help. So the right solution was not faster, better call center. It was fix the problem that generated this surge of calls.
Yeah, I do think so much of what we all collectively do in government is really problem identification. Like, are you actually solving the right problem? And I think a lot of what you've heard from both Anna and Marcy is don't start from the assumption that what you have in front of you is actually the issue. And I do think another point is we talk a lot about users. Just to be very clear, users also include government employees. So oftentimes, if you're trying to introduce this new model and it really is flying in the face of how people have either like they're hanging on to their technology that they love and they've acclimated to, or they're distrustful that this is actually going to result in something that's helpful for them. Sometimes a really good way of getting folks on board with this approach is actually to start with a fix that solves a government employee's problem, and it makes them more effective at delivering services, and kind of getting that buy-in, and then getting them more supportive of using this in a different way. I think that's one of the great benefits of this being such an iterative approach, is that yes, you want to start with a high priority, but sometimes from a strategic perspective, there's a little side thing over here that if you solve this one problem, and it's going to make it so a government employee doesn't have to log into 4 different systems to do one thing, solving that problem first may actually be the best thing that you can do to continue to advance your strategy and your vision.
Perfect. I have a question from Harshit. It says, delivery plays a crucial role in both project and product model. What are the key differentiators for the delivery in product model?
Definitely check out our slides from the session 2 weeks ago, because this goes into it in more depth, but I would call it in particular working iteratively, making decisions, having small interdisciplinary teams that are empowered to make decisions, and operating within the constraints that you have. I think in the project model, it can be easy to defer decisions to the future or defer decisions to some theoretical other, other entity in the hierarchy who you believe, will issue a statement that'll come down from on high and tell you whether to make the submit button blue or green. And so any ways that you can release yourselves from any reason why you might not make decisions, your teams might not make decisions or start work or validate assumptions by talking to users. Any way that you can get rid of that is helpful and is a part of the product model.
I would also just say that part of delivery should be learning and figuring out, does this thing do what we think it's going to do? Do we need to go further? Do we need to build out more requirements on this piece of the feature, or do we have enough? And I think the project model is so rigid that it's like you are just working through that list of requirements and building all the things, when there may be a logical stopping point, or you may be building a thing that is like such an edge case or really only benefits a small set of users, but there's something much more valuable that's kind of further down the list. So when you think about delivery, it's really saying like, what are the most important things that we can do right now? And then when you have completed those things, do we need to go further, or can we work on a different piece of the equation? Do we need to continue enhancing this, or do we have enough?
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to the downside of the project model that is just inherent, even if you nail every single requirement, is that because it takes so long, both the requirements gathering and the implementation of checking through every single box on that very long list, user needs change over time. They change rapidly. Even if you perfectly deliver a technology, but it takes 5 years to get there because that's how long it took you to get through the requirements, your user needs have almost certainly changed. So your perfectly shipped product is already out of date and you're going to have to adjust it anyway. So the other real benefit of the product model that I don't think we've leaned into quite as much in this session as we did last is that iterative deployment allows you to adjust as user needs change and evolve. And as program needs change and evolve. So it is that kind of adjusting the course as opposed to drawing the map and like staying on that road regardless of how your terrain is changing.
Okay, there's another question from Holly, and it's again on stakeholders. How do you get, where's my question? Okay, how do you get your stakeholder to agree to find a natural stopping point and not to require every requirement checkbox?
By showing them how much it'll cost to do every possible thing versus the current set of things, which may be deemed to be good enough. And then when you show them the price tag of continuing to do more work to, optimize something that maybe doesn't need to be optimized, show them the trade-offs. We could spend this money on, and remind them of the 80-20 rule. You could be like, here we have decided that this particular thing is good enough. Users tell us it's good enough. We've also validated this by showing a demo to our political leaders or whatever. And now we could take additional money and continue to refine this, or we could take additional money and work on this other component. If you lay out those trade-offs and costs to even most senior political leaders, like it's tangible, it becomes visible because you're working iteratively and you're showing regular progress that can turn into demos that demonstrate here's what we could do or here's what we have done. The more you communicate that and break it down for them, the more they'll engage reasonably with the decision points that you're teeing up.
The other like fun trick is to demo, like, look what we've already built. So when we use this model, we can ship something every 2 to 3 weeks, or have them come along with a demo with a user. and show them we're solving problems. We can, like, depending on the problem that you want us to solve, here's how we can work that into our product roadmap. But in the meanwhile, we are solving problems for our users. They are happy with it. And that happiness is going to translate into these future requirements that you're asking us to tackle.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. And then I think it would be great if you could have some time to wrap up both presentations. So there was a really long question. Okay, here it is from Matt. Say, all the organizations mentioned in the book, projects to products, are for-profit companies like Boeing, BMW, etc. These companies have very clear goals like customer lifetime value, revenue, etc. How do you make this concept work for a government agency which typically has a very different goals like public safety or defense or health?
I think there are a lot of ways to make it work. I mean, and just to be transparent, I was in the private sector for 15 years using different versions of this model. Some companies are great with it. Some of them use the project model and build really bloated things that don't actually make sense to users and then eventually go out of business. But they don't tell these stories because no one's really proud of the lessons they learned after going out of business. So I think the blend of different strategies employed here and different kinds of outcomes exist in the private sector. We just don't hear about them as much because civil servants like yourselves are eager to talk to each other and share and learn more so than in the private sector, in my humble opinion. But I think that like you can have lots of meaningful goals that aren't just make money. And in fact, most companies that are focused on making money, the majority of your work is tracked against goals or OKRs or whatever strategy you're using that are not what optimizes for the most money. Like if you're an e-commerce site and you're working on a customer review form on it and you're trying to get people to generate more customer reviews, your high level goal is not make money. You might intuitively sense that if a product has more reviews, people will trust whether it's good or not and then be more likely to purchase it. And there are many clicks in between your reviews page and the shopping cart or whatever. But regardless of what core things drive your ability to have money to do work, whether it's revenue or appropriations or other forms of government budgeting, you need project and program specific goals that drive your work. And those are the goals that you can architect to deliver against more effectively with the product model.
I love this question. I think this is such a great question because everybody cares about the finances. And I think what Lynn and Anne talked about last time was how many projects that are following a traditional project model are not successful. So spending a big bucket of money, getting to the end and saying, shrug, didn't work, can we get more money, is not a good conversation to have. And I think what this does is it de-risks what you're building. It helps you be a better steward of taxpayer dollars. So you are avoiding cost, both in the development, but also in the like forever support. We built a thing that now we have to train around and we have all these calls because it doesn't really work for people. And it helps you deliver on your mission. So money is always going to be a factor. I think there's a different calculus of, we're doing this for the private sector. And if we make it amazing, we're going to make more revenue. But there is an equally compelling kind of cost avoidance taxpayer dollar narrative around the finances for public sector projects as well.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I mean, I think the metric that government is really concerned about is did we deliver services to the public that they need? And so if you think about something as simple as like, did I create the easiest, most seamless, most straightforward form online so that somebody can access a service? That access is a really important metric because they are getting something that they aren't going to get somewhere else that the government provides. And so I think another benefit, another value of the kind of centering user needs is it means, a veteran gets their home loan or a mom gets food stamps so that they can feed their kids, or gets childcare so that they can go to work. Those metrics are, I would argue, more important than the dollar amounts that private sector companies are driving towards. Those are also trackable. So, and it's not just, did they get it? Did they get it quickly. Like, how long did it take them to complete the form? How long did it take them to get through the process? How long did it take them to actually get the thing at the end, the benefit that they were looking for? Those are all really important metrics, and improving those metrics has significant impact on the people that we're serving. And those are the kinds of things, honestly, that your bosses love to hear about, because that's what they have to tell their bosses about, or that's where they're going to go run for office again on these types of metrics. At the end of the day, for you and your teams working on these issues, especially when you do user research, there is nothing that will energize people more than sitting down with somebody and have them say, you made this so much easier for me. And as a result, I can now do X, Y, or Z. And you're never going to get that in the private sector. Although I will say the bonuses are much better in the private sector.
Yeah, they are. It's true. I do think that especially if you are early in this journey and you're trying to make the case, it can be really helpful to quantify the current state. How long does this take? So, we get 10,000 phone calls about status in a month. Each call takes 20 minutes. So somebody answering the phone makes X dollars per hour. 20 minutes costs this times 10,000. If we were to fix status, it would be a one-time cost of whatever. And then we are saving this cost. We're improving experience. Like we can really tell a story by using that data to show how much money is being wasted with poor design and with traditional project management approaches.
Okay, Anne, Mercy, and Lynn, thank you so much, so much for your wisdom, your time, your generosity, an amazing two-part workshop. And thank you to all our participants who have been so breaking question and engaging and being part of this, which is, I think, it's an amazing learning community. So feel free to reach us if you have more questions, specifically about the product model, and you will receive tomorrow the certificate of attendance plus the 2 presentations and the links to the recording. Thank you very much, everybody, and take care and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.